Turning on this audio so that we can get going. All right. Just to pick up where we left off and just review where we are. We are using the Shlomo Pines edition of the English translation of the Moreh Nevukhim by the University of Chicago Press. We also have a handout that is available to make use of to follow along in the Shir. It is in the Facebook group Shiur in Moreh Nevukhim. And we always recommend that if you'd like to take the Shir to get the most out of the Shir, that you join that Facebook group so that you can get regular updates as to when our next Shir is going to be. Where we left off before Pesach was we had started chapter 34 in the first section of Moreh Nevukhim, which starts in the Pines edition on page 72. The Rambam was introducing us to an explanation as to what prevents people in general from acquiring divine knowledge, a better understanding of God and how He runs the universe. Why is it that so few people are able to succeed in grasping this area of knowledge? I mentioned in our last class that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi discusses the idea that just like there are different orders of creation and hierarchies of creation, you can find that in nature as well. You find that a tree has a trunk, has roots, has branches, has bark, has leaves, and only a very small percentage of that tree actually ends up bearing the fruit, which is the objective of the tree. For some reason that the Rambam is not going to undertake in this chapter, Hashem created a system whereby only one segment of His creation is able to achieve a certain level of perfection. Every strata of creation, every stratum of creation is able to achieve the level of perfection that is fitting for that level of creation. Humanity is the highest level of creation because man has an intellect and other creatures, other creations of God do not. But even within the human category of creation, there are different kinds of human beings. And even within those who are most prone to perfect their intellect, there are certain limitations and hindrances that prevent people from completing a lifetime that is filled with wisdom and an understanding of the profundities of life and what he calls the divine sciences, meaning an understanding of God and His universe, or what we've called before metaphysics. And the question is, what are the factors that prevent people from ever reaching that apex, from ever reaching that level of perfection? So in the last year that we gave, we only had a chance to, in brief, discuss the 5 categories. And in brief, in the handout that we gave you last time and also that we have today in part 2, the 5 causes are summarized. Number 1, the material is inherently difficult. Number 2, there's a certain insufficiency or limitation of the human mind, which we're going to discuss. That'll be our first discussion for today. Number 3, the immenseness of the prerequisite knowledge and how people generally, when they have to embark on an endeavor that requires a tremendous amount of preparation, many people drop out because the prerequisite knowledge and preparation is simply too daunting and too laborious for them to embark upon. Number 4, some people may have superior intellects, but they lack the proper temperament and the proper virtues in order to be able to see this through. And number 5, no matter how well honed a person's intellect, no matter how well honed a person's temperament and virtue is, there are simply certain distractions of the physical world that people get bogged down in life that do not allow them to pursue the perfection of their intellects to be able to understand metaphysics. So that's the 5 reasons summarized, where we had learned last time the inherent difficulty of the material, makes it somewhat inaccessible to people because it is quite deep. The Torah is compared to water, and the Rambam had extended that analogy to basically say that just like if you are a diver, only the most proficient divers will have the ability to go down to the ocean bed, the floor of the ocean, and to be able to gather the pearls. The same thing is true when it comes to wisdom. Wisdom is accessible to anyone, but some people can only acquire surface wisdom, and it's only the truly adept individuals and the ones who have true perseverance who will be able to dive down into the bottom of the ocean to really glean the most valuable assets that the water has to offer them. So it's a lot of depth, and sometimes people don't go past the surface material, and they only look at the pshat. They only look at the simple understanding of not only the Torah but of the world in general, and they don't delve deeper. So that's cause number one why so many people fall short of attaining perfect knowledge. The second cause is what we're up to, and it's on page 73. The second cause is the insufficiency of the minds of all men at their beginnings. And what we basically call this is the insufficiency of people's minds. There are certain limitations to the human mind. And what the Rambam is getting at over here is not only the material is difficult, but it many times requires an individual to train their intellect to get to a point where they're capable of understanding accessible ideas. In other words, even though an idea may be accessible, but I have to go through certain experiences in life and certain maturation in order for me to be ready to reach the pinnacle of my wisdom. I certainly, as a person who's middle-aged at this stage in his life, I consider myself to have more wisdom than I had when I was in my teens or when I was in my 20s. So we have to simply dismiss a whole segment of humanity who have not yet intellectually matured, and that would explain why that segment of the population simply is not ready to attain a certain level of wisdom. And he therefore says, for man is not granted his ultimate perfection at the outset. Human beings are born as babies with very, very limited intellect, not even a level of self-awareness, and it's a very slow process through which they mature. And accordingly, he therefore quotes the pasuk in Eov that man is born a wild ass. He says, "Va'ayir pera adam yivaled." A man is born like a donkey, right? Just with very, very limited knowledge, and just like a donkey is only aware of the burden that's on its back. Sometimes human beings can't see past their nose to try and understand things on a deeper level. Nor is it necessary obligatory in the case of every individual who is endowed with something in potency that this thing should become actual. And what he's pointing out is that even people who are born with huge IQs, who are born with tremendous potential to attain great levels of wisdom, sometimes things happen in life and they don't take advantage of the potential that exists within them. You know, people are born into different stations in life. I was thinking of that film Good Will Hunting, where the Will Damon character is a custodian at I think it was Harvard University, and he was able to solve all of the equations in the mathematics, the high-level mathematics department. But sometimes people are born to be farmers because that's the family that they were born into, which does not acquire a tremendous amount of intellectual endeavor in order to, at least not on the esoteric level, to acquire knowledge of esoteric ideas. They may have the tremendous capacity for that, but because the family needs them to work the farm, they simply don't have the opportunity available to them to hone their intellect and to be able to work on these ideas. And therefore, he says, sometimes it remains in its defective state, either because of certain obstacles or because of a paucity of training in what transforms that potentiality into actuality. And therefore, he quotes another pasuk, once again from Sefer Eov, where the pasuk says, "Lo rabim yechkamu, uzakenim yavinu mishpat." Not everyone becomes wise to become an elder. The sages, too, of blessed memory, said that I saw the people who have attained a high rank, and they were few. Now, he's quoting a Gemara here in Masechet Sukkah, page 45b. And in the sheet that you have, it's in source number 3. It's actually part of a much longer, extensive discussion, which is worthwhile for us to focus on for just a moment. He says, Chizkiah in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was one of the wisest men who ever lived, simply because he had, I guess you could call it the luxury. Wasn't really a luxury. I mean, you could say that being under quarantine for the coronavirus is a luxury. Why is it a luxury? Because it affords us the opportunity to spend time reading and contemplating things that perhaps we never had time to before. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was in a cave for 13 years with his son Rabbi Eliezer Bereb Shimon. And that afforded them the opportunity, even though it was a horrible existence because they were in hiding from the Roman authorities, but it nevertheless afforded them the opportunity to be contemplative and to develop their intellects to a point where they were able to achieve very, very sublime levels of divine knowledge, which is why Reb Shimon Bar Yochai is attributed with authoring the Zohar, which is a very esoteric text. And basically he says in the Gemara in Sukkah, Ra'iti b'nei aliyah v'hein mu'atin. He says, I've made note of the people in this world who have reached the level of high intellectual attainment, and they are very few. And he says, Im elef hein ani uvanai mehen, im me'ahen ani uvanai mehem, im shnayim hein ani uvanai hein. He says, if there are only 1,000, I certainly count myself and my son Rabbi Eliezer among them. If there are only 100, I also count only myself and my son Eliezer among them. And if there are only 2 people who have reached that very high level, then it's only myself and my son Eliezer. Why? Because no one has really worked as hard as we have and had the life experience that we've had in order to be able to attain that great wisdom. So the Gemara asks the question, is it really possible to suggest that there is such a small amount of the human population that has attained that level of wisdom? Don't we know that there are 18,000 rows of scholars, as Scripture writes, that surround God, which implies that these people are in God's inner sanctum of knowledge and of understanding of the divinity? So the Gemara answers, Lo kasha ha'demistakli ba'aspaklaria ha'me'ira, ha'delo mistakli ba'aspaklaria ha'me'ira. So the Gemara's response is, well, there's different levels of great minds and great intellects who have the ability to connect with God. And the Gemara lays down a terminology called aspaklaria ha'me'ira, which means the ability to view God with a clear lens. Now it seems here, at least certainly the way the Maharsha understands it, that we're not dealing with prophecy, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would not take the daring claim that he is a prophet. But what the Gemara is suggesting is, when it comes to the attainment of wisdom, there are 2 levels of wise men. There are wise men who clearly discern God with an aspaklaria ha'me'ira, which is a clear lens, like when you look through a glass. You look through a pane of glass, through a window, you see the other side very clearly. And then there's also another type of understanding or discernment of God, which is aspaklaria she'ena me'ira, an unclear lens or an unclear pane of glass, which is clouded, occluded. And both people may be wise, but one level is of a much higher level than the other. And then the Gemara continues this line of questioning. So you're saying that there's possibly only a couple of people in every generation who can see through that clear lens and everyone else sees through an occluded lens? But the ha'amar Abaye lo pachos alma mitlatin v'shita tzadiki demekabli ape shchina b'chol yom. What about the famous Lamed Vavniks? There's a tradition that is based on this Gemara and a Gemara in Sanhedrin, that there are 36 righteous people who received the divine presence every day. And what the Gemara seems to explain is that this not only refers to a level of righteousness, but it also refers to a level of divine wisdom. There are at least 36 who have this kind of interface with God on a daily basis. So doesn't that imply that these people have a clear vision and apprehension of the Almighty? And the Gemara therefore answers, Lo kasha hada'ili bibar hada'ili below bar. And the Gemara answers, even within those who have a very clear apprehension of the divine, there are some people who come and enter into that inner sanctum with God's permission, and some people enter without God's permission. Now, what that means for our purposes today is really not important, but what I wanted to introduce you to in going over this Gemara, we will certainly probably come back to this Gemara because the Rambam is very much, he harbors an elitist belief in the attainment of wisdom. What the Gemara is essentially telling you is that there's a hierarchical system of the attainment of wisdom, especially when it comes into esoteric matters of understanding God. The lowest level are those who have attained a wisdom of the divine sciences of metaphysics, but only see it in an occluded way. It doesn't have the clarity that we would normally hope for in understanding other types of things that are much more attainable and accessible. There are those who are even higher, who can see God through a clear lens, an aspaklaria hami'ira. And finally, there's an even higher level than that a subset of those who can see God through the clear lens, who are those who have been invited, so to speak, by God, by receiving some kind of divine message or divine signal that God wants them in that inner sanctum because of their righteousness or for some other reason. And that's what Reb Shimon Bar Yochai was claiming, that only he and his son really had reached that highest of high levels. So therefore, concludes the Rambam that the obstacles to perfection are very many, and the objects that distract from it abound. When should he be able to achieve the perfect preparation and the leisure required for training, so that what subsists in a particular individual in potency should be transformed into actuality? A lot of people have great potential for wisdom, but as you and I all know, we tend to squander our potential. Being in isolation during this period of time is a perfect example. How many things do we look back in the last month that we've been in isolation and said, gee, in the last month I could have learned how to play the flute, or I could have learned how to sew, or I could have learned how to paint. So many people are taking advantage, and other people are sort of squandering because they're busy watching videos and doing other kinds of narishkeit. So essentially what the Rambam is saying is that, yes, it's true, the human intellect has great potential, but not everyone is capable or has the luxury of taking advantage of the human intellect to be able to plumb its depths. I once heard a neuroscience statistic that human beings typically only use 10% or less of their brain in order to be able to grasp what's out there in the world. So imagine how much we're using today. Are we using more than our ancestors, or are we using even less? So let's put reason number 2. The second cause is the insufficiency of the human mind to be able to grasp things, because it takes a certain level of development and maturation in order to get to that point, and not everyone is going to succeed in plumbing the depths of their potential. So now we get to the third cause, and the third cause to summarize it, is the immensement of the prerequisite knowledge. And essentially what the Rambam is going to sort of encapsulate this reason is that people are lazy. People are easily daunted by hard work, and attaining wisdom takes a tremendous amount of labor, not manual labor, but intellectual labor. And because of all of the prerequisites that a person must undergo in order to achieve the bottom line, or the final objective, people recoil from that because people are reluctant to put in that level of investment of time and effort in order to be able to only attain something which may perhaps be attained at the end of that journey, but it could sometimes take years and years of hard work in order to obtain the objective of understanding the divine on some level and gaining access to this very esoteric metaphysical knowledge. So let's start reading the text, it's actually, this is, the Rambam devotes the most amount of time to this reason. And Rav Kafich, in his commentary to Moreh Nevukhim, says that there's a reason why the Rambam devotes so much time to this, because the Rambam achieved an inordinate amount of intellectual success in his life. His prodigious authorship, his output of material was just unprecedented. I mean, the amount of texts that he was able to author, to do the whole Perush HaMishnayos, and to do the entire Mishnah Torah, and to do the Sefer HaMitzvot, and to do the Moreh Nevukhim, and to do all of the epistles and the letters that and the correspondences that he wrote. And on top of that, to act as a physician for a royal court. The amount of work that this took the Rambam was, we would say, was superhuman. There are certain medieval narratives of the Rambam, having had supernatural encounters with angels in order to be able to endow him or imbue him with this wisdom. And the reality is that none of that is true. The Rambam was not, did not have an angel sort of zap him with this immense amount of wisdom and knowledge. He just worked really, really hard. And very, very few people are prepared to put in that hard work. And so the Rambam wants to really underscore that by saying that it's hard, it's tough work. The Rambam actually wrote at some point what his daily routine was like, and you and I would just be exhausted reading it, as far as getting up and having to travel and just to be a physician during the day, and then have to spend the evening hours doing a whole bunch of writing and reviewing what he had already written. Just a lot of work. So therefore, the third cause lies in the length of the preliminaries. For man has in his nature a desire to seek the ends. What that means is, just tell me the bottom line. As a rabbi, I am very used to this kind of line of expectation. Someone will call me with a shaila, with a question. And the question is not a simple yes or no answer, because there are many factors in determining the correct course of action. So I may, on the phone or in person, begin a conversation with the individual who has asked me the shaila. And the person may end up saying, this is all interesting, and with all due respect, Rabbi, just tell me the bottom line. Many times people are not interested in getting involved in very long discussions and investigations about the way to get to the end objective. They just want the bottom line, okay? And he often finds preliminaries tedious and refuses to engage in them. Know, however, that if an end could be achieved without the preliminaries that precede it, the latter would not be preliminaries but pure distractions and futilities. Essentially, that you have to appreciate that there are certain things that cannot be attained through a shortcut. There are certain things in life that if you try to use a shortcut, you will end up failing to attain your objective. That's true with so many endeavors on the physical plane. If you want to be a winemaker, or if you want to be any other kind of person who produces something that has a sublime aesthetic quality to it, it takes a tremendous amount of patience. You want to produce a work of art, you need to be patient. You need prerequisite knowledge in order to know how to paint properly or how to sculpt properly in order to produce something of beauty. You want to be able to become a musician. It takes a tremendous amount of discipline in order to be able to learn how to play properly. You want to be a virtuoso? It takes even more effort. It takes years and years of practice and painstaking work. And many times there's no gratification instantly in most of those situations, because the training process is not a gratifying experience, because it's hard work and you're making a lot of mistakes along the way, and you feel like you're never going to reach the end goal. But the same thing is true with intellectual endeavors. If you would awaken a man, even though he were the dullest of all people, as one awakens a sleeping individual, and if you were to ask him whether he desired at that moment to have knowledge of so many of these esoteric concepts, and the Rambam gives us a list of examples of so many of the esoteric concepts. The heavenly spheres, which we're going to be discussing a lot when we get into the Rambam's understanding of Neoplatonic ideas. Heavenly spheres are the medieval belief that the Rambam subscribes to, is that our world is subsumed under concentric transparent spheres in which the stars and the other celestial bodies are embedded. And you want to be able to have a better understanding of those heavenly spheres, namely what their number is and what their configuration, and what is contained in them, and what the angels are, and how the world as a whole was created, and what its end is in view of the arrangement of its various parts with one another, and what the soul is, and how it is implanted within the body at a specific time, meaning, at what point do the body and the soul come together, and how do they come together, and whether the human soul can be separated from the body, and if it can, in what manner and through what instrument and with what distinction in view. And if you put the same question to him with regard to other subjects of research of this kind, he would undoubtedly answer in the affirmative. If I could be endowed with all of this knowledge, fantastic. I would love to know all of this, the secrets of how the world works, of how the world connects through a series of intermediary bodies between our world and the divine realm, how the soul, which is some kind of emanation from God himself, bonds with the physical. I want to be able to understand all of these very lofty ideas of the way that the metaphysical and the physical connect in some way. He would have a natural desire to know these things as they are in truth, but he would wish this desire to be allayed and the knowledge of all this to be achieved by means of one or two words that you would say to him. Rabbi, give me the bottom line. Just tell me how it works. But it doesn't work that way. It's not so simple. There are certain prerequisite steps that you need to understand and appreciate before I can give you the advanced explanation of what these things are all about. I'm reminded of that film, The Matrix, where Neo gets put in a chair and he wants to learn a whole bunch of different languages. And so they plug this metal plug into the back of the base of his brain, and all of a sudden the computer imbues his brain with all of this knowledge that he needs in order to become a jiu-jitsu master and all of these other things. The point is that the brain doesn't work that way. And maybe one day we'll develop a science that will enable a person to be endowed automatically with all of these levels of knowledge without having to persevere in the natural method of attainment of knowledge. But whether that will be the same thing as attaining knowledge in the natural way, who knows? The point is, without that kind of science fiction technology, the only way that you can attain certain areas of wisdom is with hard work. There is no way to get to there by a shortcut. And therefore he says, however, if you would lay upon him the obligation to abandon his occupation, even for just 1 week, until he would understand all this, he would say, sorry, I got no time. I'm not taking off a week to be able to devote to these esoteric concepts which have no bearing upon my bottom line parnasa or my bottom line, how's it going to help me? But would be satisfied with deceptive imaginings through which his soul would be set at ease. I don't need to understand it completely. It's too much effort, it's too much work, I need to take off too much time from my regular job. Just give me a mushal, give me an analogy that will help me understand. He would also dislike being told that there is a thing whose knowledge requires many premises and a long time for investigation. We are, especially today, a very, very short attention span society. We love to be spoon-fed, which is why the media spoon feeds us all the time with stories, with ideas. And we don't like to read, we don't like to investigate, we don't like to pore over books that are very philosophical. And this is all what the Rambam is referring to. This existed in his time as well. People simply were reluctant to engage into these matters because they just simply take too much time, too much of an investment of their very, very precious resources of time and mental energy. And life's too short, I got too many other things I have to take care of. And so this is the beginning of reason number 3, but it's certainly a pretty good synopsis. Essentially what the Rambam is saying is that The information is available to everyone, but not everyone is prepared to put in the effort in order to glean that. And as we'll see, the more effort that a person puts in, the more that they will pull out. There's a lot more to discuss. We weren't able to get into the sources today of the that we have in the handout for you. We'll deal with that next time. This is actually a good point for us to stop, because the next subject that the Rambam is going to engage in trying to explain the reason why people aren't prepared to engage in the necessary prerequisites is that we need to appreciate that in order to understand God, we have to investigate the world that He created. And the world itself helps us better to understand God, but people aren't prepared to put in that effort to really look at the world carefully and study it properly, study the sciences of the world, and really to understand what's going on out there. And we'll talk about how the world itself is reflective of God, and that'll be our discussion for next time. I hope you're doing well under these very unusual days in which we're living, and I hope you have a great week. And Amir Tzashem, we will see you next week. Have a great day.